In many ways, however, the art of conversation being perfected in the Salon de Madame de Rambouillet and others was actually helping the monarchy. Francis I had passed a law in 1539 called the Ordonnance of Villers-Cotterêts, which made French, as opposed to Latin, the official language of the country. From then on, all laws, decrees, and official documents had to be written in French. This was an important shift, one designed to increase the influence of French culture and politics over Europe, but one for which the very upper classes and much of the lower classes were not altogether quite ready. Indeed, the edict prohibited the use of Latin, but also Occitan, Picard, and other regional dialects. The French vernacular at this time was far from being considered a learned language. In fact, there was no really standard French to speak of. Where was good French to be found? Women. Due to the fact that they received very little instruction in the humanities, meaning they did not learn much Greek or Latin, the French that women spoke was untainted by the ancient tongues. Also, because upper-class women of the court had little to no commerce with anyone who spoke in provincial dialects, their language was considered to be the best place to start building a standard French. Moreover, the life of the women at court had received a huge boost from the publication by Genevan Bishop Francis de Sales, his 1609 Introduction to the Devout Life. The bishop, who is honored as a saint in the Catholic Church, wrote this pleasant little tract as a series of letters to a noblewoman in France who worried whether she could practice religious devotion while carrying on a public life as a young, beautiful wife of a wealthy minister. It should be noted that before the publication of this treatise, religious devotion was mainly confined to the monastery or convent. Public life was antithetical to the piety demanded by the Church. Yet de Sales, who was one of the most popular churchmen of the day, said this was no longer true. He contended rather that, quote, as the mother of pearl lives in the sea without ever absorbing one drop of salt water, and as near the Chaldonian Isles springs of sweet water start forth in the midst of the ocean, and as the fire moth hovers in the flames without burning her wings, even so a true, steadfast soul may live in the world untainted by worldly breath, finding a wellspring of holy piety amid the bitter waves of society, and hovering amid the flames of earthly lusts without singeing the wings of its devout life. With this, not only was the courtly life of the woman anointed in a certain sense, but in fact they were given a method for the development and refinement of taste. Of course, de Sales had meant taste for God and contemplation of the divine. Although he did not convey any prohibitions, and indeed said that pleasures such as wine and theater could be reasonably enjoyed, he cautioned that a devout soul must not develop too keen a taste for these activities. In a memorable passage about getting rid of one's evil inclinations, he wrote, quote, gardeners have found how to make the bitter almond tree bear sweet fruit by grafting the juice of the latter upon it. Why should we not purge out our perverse dispositions and infuse such as are good? The idea of uprooting the bad and cultivating the good through everyday practices was one that women were especially adept at implementing, given their role as organizers of the domestic space, a domestic space that, starting with the Madame de Rambouillet, absorbed an ever-growing number of otherwise public figures. The domestication of public morality by Madame de Rambouillet and her coterie of elegant women, writers and artists, would have major public ramifications. But judging from the goings-on that took place in this celebrated space, politics could not have been further from their mind. Just what went on in this literary salon? The salon was set up to be a utopian space, far from the world. Its decoration was intended to completely displace its guests. In fact, Madame de Rambouillet's house was situated between the Louvre Palace and the Palais Royal, meaning right in the middle of the royal campus. And yet, from her front window, one could watch a rural scene go by, hay wagon and all, as she had required a miniature field to be planted so as to create the impression that one was in the countryside. If you made it through the threshold, you would find the most intimate of atmospheres. Madame de Rambouillet's taste could be found in miniature all around, in the baskets of flowers that scented each room, in the crystal knickknacks that were strewn across her tables, and especially in her blue bedroom. The blue room was considered quite original at the time. Grand rooms of this type were almost always painted in tones of gold and red. Here, every surface was covered in blue fabrics and brocades, from the curtains to the bed covers. Because of course there was a bed. This wasn't the actual bed where the Marquise slept at night. She had moved that bed into a closet somewhere out of the way. Yet the Chambre Bleue was a bedroom, in which she lounged as a conversational Venus, inviting her intimate friends to occupy the space between her luxurious bed and the brocaded wall. It may seem a little bizarre to us now, but Madame de Rambouillet single-handedly turned this little space, called La Ruelle, into the center of virtue in the public imagination. Suddenly, everyone's ruelle was purified, and hearts were cleansed when they spoke there. It became a place of prestige. Remember from our earlier lesson that Louis XIV would require the attendance of his highest courtiers at both his lever and coucher, or the time when he was rising from bed and going to sleep. This was in fact a kingly tradition, but it was arrogated to Rambouillet and finally brought to its apotheosis by Louis XIV. But what actually happened in Madame de Rambouillet's house? As I mentioned before, everything centered on language. Plays were written, plays were read, but most of all, plays were played. Everyone had roles, and the roles were cast especially to spark passion. Poems were written, and word games were abundant. As Benedetta Craveri put it, perhaps it was the awareness that idleness was an essential element of aristocratic life, that to know how to cultivate it nobly was a mark of identity and of belonging. Perhaps it was the fear of the void and of solitude, the same void that Pascal would soon describe in his Pensées as defining social life from its earliest beginnings. Each of these explanations has an element of truth. The sum of them imparted a frankly utopian quality to the Hôtel de Rambouillet.